In 1833, a small locomotive called the Liverpool arrived at the Petersburg Railroad in Virginia. It had been built in the workshop of Edward Barry, a Liverpool iron founder locked in a fierce rivalry with Robert Stephenson. The Liverpool had failed in England, but when American railroad men rebuilt it and set it to work on rough Virginia track, something unexpected happened. It ran, and it kept running. While heavier British engines cracked their frames on the uneven American roadbed, the Liverpool held together. The difference was hiding in the iron bones of the locomotive frame. That design choice was the bar frame, and the story of how it evolved into something far more ambitious is one of the most overlooked chapters in locomotive history. Picture the railroads of the 1830s. In England, Robert Stephenson and his contemporaries built their railways with near-obsessive precision. The roadbed was graded flat. The rails were laid on carefully prepared surfaces. Tunnels were bored through hills rather than routing track over them. British locomotive designers could afford to build rigid, thin plate frames because the track beneath them was smooth and predictable. America was a different world entirely. Railroads in the 1830s and 40s were being pushed across vast distances as fast as possible, through forests, over mountains, and across rivers with little time for careful grading. The track was rough. The rails sat on wooden stringers that shifted with the seasons. Curves were sharp and grades were steep. But here's the critical detail that separated success from failure on those early American lines. A rigid British plate frame, barely 1 to 2 inches thick, would flex and crack under these conditions within months. The bar frame solved this problem through structural generosity. Instead of thin steel plates, it used forged iron bars, 4 to 7 inches thick, arranged as an openwork girder on either side of the locomotive. Where plate frames were rigid and precise, bar frames were thick, heavy, and flexible enough to absorb the constant lateral shocks of rough American track without fracturing. The spring mechanisms and equalizing levers that American builders added to the running gear worked in harmony with the bar frame to give the locomotive a kind of controlled looseness, a tolerance for imperfection that British designs did not have. Why did this matter so much? Because in early American railroading, the locomotive that survived was the locomotive that could forgive its track. British engines expected smooth road beneath them. American engines, built on bar frames, expected nothing of the sort. American locomotive builders like Baldwin, Norris, and Rogers adopted the bar frame as their standard within a decade. By the 1850s, it had become the defining structural feature of the American locomotive, as characteristic as the cow catcher or the diamond smokestack. European engineers sometimes dismissed it as crude. The bar frame was heavier than a plate frame. It forced the boiler center higher to accommodate the deep firebox, and it made the ash pan narrow and less efficient. But on American track, with American loads, across American distances, it worked. And it kept working on American railroads through the rest of the 19th century. The trouble started as the locomotives themselves grew larger. By the turn of the 20th century, American railroads were demanding engines with more power, bigger boilers, and heavier trains than anyone in the 1830s could have imagined. A freight locomotive in 1900 weighed 3 or 4 times what a locomotive had weighed in 1850, and the boiler pressures were climbing toward 200 pounds per square inch. The old bar frames were still being assembled from multiple forged sections, bolted and riveted together at dozens of connection points. Each of those joints was a potential weak spot. Under the growing weight of larger boilers and the hammering force of bigger pistons, those bolted connections began to fail. Frame cracks became a persistent maintenance headache on railroads across the country. Railroad shop workers grew all too familiar with the sound of a locomotive limping in with a fractured frame rail, and the repair bills added up quickly. Engineers tried reinforcing the joints with heavier crossmembers. They experimented with different bolt patterns and thicker bars. But the fundamental problem remained. A frame assembled from separate pieces could never be as strong as a frame made from a single piece, because every joint was a place where stress concentrated and metal fatigued. How do you solve a problem that lives in the very nature of bolted construction? You stop bolting altogether. And that answer came from an unexpected place. It did not come from a locomotive builder. It came from a steel foundry in Granite City, Illinois. Commonwealth Steel was founded in 1901 by Clarence Howard, who had started in the railroad supply business by manufacturing cast steel bolsters for passenger cars. Howard was an ambitious industrialist with a gift for thinking on larger and larger scales. In 1904, his company exhibited its cast steel bolsters at the St. Louis World's Fair, demonstrating that complex structural railroad components could be poured as single castings rather than assembled from dozens of smaller parts. The idea behind the Granite City casting process was elegantly simple. If you could pour a locomotive frame in one piece of molten steel, you eliminated the joints that caused failures in the first place. Over the next 2 decades, Howard's engineers kept pushing the boundaries of what could be cast in a single pour. The foundry at Granite City grew into one of the largest steel foundries in the world, stretching across 30 acres of industrial landscape along the Mississippi River floodplain. By the mid-1920s, the plant had undergone a $1.5 million expansion that increased its capacity by 35%, and it was producing what industry observers called the largest steel castings in the world. The open hearth furnaces consumed tons of scrap steel and raw materials in each heat, and the molten metal had to be poured with careful timing and precision through molds of astonishing complexity. A single casting error, a bubble of trapped gas, a crack from cooling too quickly could ruin weeks of pattern making and mold preparation. But Commonwealth's foundry workers and engineers had perfected their craft through years of practice, and by the mid-1920s, they had set their sights on the most ambitious casting project in railroad history. In 1924, Commonwealth Steel delivered something no foundry had ever produced before: a one-piece cast steel locomotive bed. A single continuous casting that integrated the frame structure of a steam locomotive into one unbroken piece of metal. The first one went to the New York Central Railroad. What made the one-piece bed so significant was not its size alone, though the dimensions were staggering. These castings stretched up to 52 feet long and weighed over 40,000 pounds each. What mattered was what the casting eliminated. Hundreds of bolted joints, each one a potential failure point, simply vanished. The cylinders, steam chests, smoke box saddle, and frame rails that had previously been manufactured separately and then bolted together were now poured as a single integrated structure. There were no seams to work loose under vibration and no rivets to shear under the pounding of heavy freight service. The weak points that had plagued bolted bar frames for decades disappeared into the molten steel at Granite City. By 1926, Commonwealth had taken the concept even further, producing locomotive beds with the cylinders and steam chests cast integral with the frame itself. The Terminal Railroad Association of St. Louis received one of these advanced castings, and the results confirmed what engineers had hoped. But did the numbers back up the theory? Locomotives equipped with one-piece beds ran harder, lasted longer, and required dramatically less frame maintenance than their bolted predecessors. What had once been a weekly inspection chore for shop mechanics became a far less frequent concern. The railroad industry noticed quickly. Within 2 years, Commonwealth's products had become so essential that, as industry publications noted at the time, practically all locomotives and passenger cars built in the United States were using Commonwealth components. One foundry in southern Illinois had quietly made itself indispensable to every major railroad in the country. And that is when the 2 largest locomotive builders in America made a decision that reveals how important this casting technology had become. In 1928, the Baldwin Locomotive Works and the American Locomotive Company, fierce competitors who agreed on very little, joined forces with American steel foundries to create a new entity called General Steel Castings Corporation. Their purpose was singular. They needed to control the supply of one-piece cast steel locomotive beds, because without those castings, neither Baldwin nor Alco could build the next generation of American steam power. Consider what that means. Two companies that had spent decades trying to undercut each other in the locomotive market decided that owning the foundry was more important than competing with each other. In 1929, General Steel Castings acquired Commonwealth Steel for $35 million, a sum that reflected how critical the Granite City foundry had become. Clarence Howard, Commonwealth's president, became chairman of the new corporation's board. The company's first board meeting included the presidents of Baldwin, Alco, and the Pullman Company, a gathering of the most influential figures in American railroading, all sitting around a table because of a steel casting. If you have been watching this far and find this kind of engineering history worth exploring, hit subscribe. There is always another story hiding in the details of how these machines were built. That acquisition of the Granite City foundry proved to be perfectly timed. The late 1920s and 30s saw the arrival of what railroad historians call the Superpower era, a period when American steam locomotives reached sizes and capabilities that would have seemed impossible a generation earlier. Railroads were competing fiercely for passenger traffic and freight revenue, and their weapon in that competition was speed, tonnage, and reliability. Every major railroad wanted bigger, faster, more capable power. And every one of those locomotives needed a one-piece cast steel bed from General Steel Castings to hold it together. Consider the prototype New York Central Hudson, locomotive number 5200, when it arrived in 1927. Its frame used cast steel side rails bolted to separate cross members, with cast steel cylinders attached by more bolts. It worked, but the bolted structure still carried the old weakness of assembled frames. By 1929, the last 5 Hudsons in the J1C order were being built with fully integrated one-piece cast beds, and every Hudson class that followed used them as standard equipment. The difference in maintenance records between the early bolted Hudsons and the later one-piece versions told a clear story about the value of eliminating joints. Shop workers who had once spent hours inspecting and tightening frame bolts on the older engines found far less to do on the locomotives with cast beds. Other railroads reached the same conclusion through their own experience. Pennsylvania Railroad's engineering department, long considered one of the most demanding in the industry, specified one-piece cast steel beds for its heavy freight locomotives after seeing the results on competing lines. By the mid-1930s, it would have been unusual for any major American locomotive builder to propose a new design without one. But the real test of the cast steel bed was still ahead. The Niagara-class locomotives that the New York Central introduced in the 1940s represented the pinnacle of what the cast steel bed made possible. These were machines designed to haul heavy passenger trains at sustained high speeds across hundreds of miles, running between Harmon, New York, and Chicago with minimal stops. The stresses involved were enormous, with sustained piston forces pushing through every stroke, lateral loads shifting through curves at speed, and thermal expansion from the boiler pressing against the frame above. A bolted structure would have required constant inspection and tightening under those conditions. The one-piece casting simply absorbed the forces and held steady, mile after mile, run after run. By 1948, General Steel Castings had manufactured over 6,000 cast steel locomotive beds. They were in service across the United States, Canada, Mexico, Australia, France, the Soviet Union, Turkey, and South Africa. A design born in a foundry along the Mississippi River floodplain had become a worldwide standard for building steam locomotives that could absorb punishment and keep running. And then the steam era came to a close. The diesel locomotive revolution of the 1950s swept away steam power with a speed that startled even its advocates. Within a single decade, thousands of steam locomotives were scrapped, their cast steel beds cut apart with torches and sold for scrap metal. The foundries that had produced them pivoted to manufacturing diesel locomotive truck frames and industrial castings. Commonwealth's plant at Granite City continued operating, but the era of 52-foot locomotive beds poured in a single heat was over. What did not end was the design philosophy those castings represented. And if you look carefully at what replaced steam, you can see the family resemblance. Look at a modern diesel freight locomotive, the kind you see hauling trains across North America today. Underneath the hood panels and walkways sits a heavy structural frame that carries every mechanical load: the diesel engine, the generator, the traction motors, the fuel tanks, and the cooling systems. The bodywork above serves no structural purpose. It consists of removable panels designed for easy maintenance access. A mechanic can unbolt a hood panel, swing it open, and reach the component that needs repair without disturbing the structural integrity of the locomotive at all. This approach, known in railroad terminology as the hood unit, carries forward the same principle that produced the cast steel locomotive bed. The frame is the machine. Everything else attaches to it, and when something breaks, you fix the attachment, not the frame. European locomotives, by contrast, still tend toward enclosed body structures where the shell itself provides structural strength, a philosophy that traces its lineage back to those thin plate frames of the 19th century. The divide that began with Edward Barry's bar frame in the 1830s between American structural generosity and European structural efficiency persists in locomotive engineering to this day. Neither approach is wrong. Each evolved to serve its own conditions. But the American one started with a forgotten iron founder in Liverpool and ended with a foundry in Illinois that poured the backbone of the largest steam locomotives ever built. The one-piece cast steel locomotive bed is not a famous innovation. It does not have the romance of a steam whistle echoing through a mountain pass, or the visual drama of driving wheels taller than a grown person. You cannot see it without getting underneath the locomotive and looking up at the belly of the boiler. But for the engineers who designed it and the foundry workers who poured it in the heat of those Granite City furnaces, it was the single most important structural advance in a century of American locomotive building. It took the old bar frame principle, the conviction that a locomotive skeleton should be generous, integrated, and tolerant of punishment, and pushed it to its logical conclusion: one unbroken piece of steel, carrying everything. The next time you watch a freight train pass and feel the ground tremble beneath those diesel locomotives, remember that the frame holding all of it together carries the DNA of a design that Clarence Howard's foundry perfected a century ago in Granite City, Illinois. The locomotives changed over the decades, and so did the engines and the fuel that powered them. But the idea that the frame should be one continuous piece of strength endured. It outlived steam. It outlived the foundry that created it. And it is still rolling down the tracks today.